Breaking news. The federal investigation into extensive financial fraud and tax evasion has led authorities to this location.
Ma'am, we need you to come with us.
She thought the luxury life, financed by my money, would kick off with a wedding in the Dominican Republic, a wedding she explicitly forbade me from attending. She didn't know that I had spent 40 years in cybersecurity, and that my quote zero wouldn't be spoken aloud, but a detailed digital audit sent straight to the Internal Revenue Service. The moment her SMS about the private ceremony landed on my phone, the game began. I am Robert. I'm 68 years old, retired, and, to most people, I look like a regular guy. A quiet, slightly boring grandfather who enjoys his garden and a cup of black coffee on the porch. But for 4 decades, before I cashed out my pension, I was one of the most respected and most feared white-hat hackers at the National Security Agency. I built firewalls that protected state secrets. I knew how to find a single, tiny, anomalous packet of data hidden in a trillion-byte haystack. My official title was quote 2, but my real job was finding the vulnerabilities before the bad guys did. And now, my future daughter-in-law had become my new, unintended target. If you want to hear more true stories of high-stakes revenge and digital justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this plays out. My son David is a good kid, a decent, kind-hearted man, perhaps a little naive, but he was my world. I raised him alone after his mother passed, and I poured every ounce of love, hard work, and good advice I had into him. I wanted him to have the best. That, unfortunately, included a substantial trust fund I'd set up for his eventual marriage and future. Then, Chloe arrived. From the moment I met her, I felt a low, resonant alarm bell ringing in my gut. It wasn't just a father being protective. It was the same instinct I used to detect zero-day exploits. Chloe was beautiful, yes, but she carried herself like a highly polished, expensive piece of software running on a very shallow operating system. Every conversation with me was a subtle, almost imperceptible probe into my financial status. "Oh, Robert, that car is so classic. What year is your stock portfolio from?" Or, "You must have such a peaceful retirement. No big expenses, right?" It was exhausting and transparent, but David was completely blind, seeing only her manufactured adoration. The red flags got bigger. She pushed him to quit his job, arguing he should take a sabbatical while they planned the future. The future, of course, meant using my money to upgrade their apartment, buy designer clothes, and start looking at houses I was supposed to finance. I quietly refused the major requests, saying the trust was for their stability, not their immediate gratification. My refusal was met with icy silence from Chloe, and a strange, defensive loyalty from David. The absolute, jaw-dropping cruelty came 3 weeks ago. I was expecting the formal invitations for their large, local wedding that David and I had discussed. Instead, I got a text message from David's number, a text I knew Chloe had typed, or at least dictated. It was short, brutally cold, and impersonal. It wasn't the rejection that cut me. It was the absolute, casual dismissal of 68 years of fatherhood. I wasn't just not invited. I was banned. It confirmed everything I suspected. I was a walking, talking ATM that had temporarily run out of cash, and now they were moving on with the transaction without the quote 6 of my presence. As I looked at that text, my hands didn't shake with sadness. They stilled. The retiree was gone. The NSA consultant was back. And I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about protecting my assets from a clear and present threat. And I was going to treat her finances like a high-risk security audit. The text message wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war, disguised as a wedding announcement. We decided to do a private destination wedding in the Dominican Republic. It's better that you don't come." This wasn't David speaking. It was Chloe's script, her calculated way of cutting off my funding until they needed another deposit. I felt a cold resolve settle over me. I knew any emotional appeal to David would fail. Chloe had him completely manipulated. To save him, I needed proof. Hard, undeniable evidence that she wasn't just a gold digger, but a financial risk, maybe even a criminal. This wasn't vengeance. This was an executive security action. One last job to protect my legacy. I descended into my quiet basement, pulling out my .8, my old, heavily customized NSA work laptop, untouched for years. It felt like picking up a forgotten weapon. I was Robert, the white hat hacker, and I was initiating a full financial and character audit of Chloe, using only legal OSINT, open source intelligence. People always leave digital breadcrumbs. My task was to find the overlooked crumbs and connect them. I started small. Her current social media was locked down, but I quickly located a forgotten 5-year-old public blog. It was tedious content, but the metadata was a jackpot. Tucked away in the code was a defunct P.O. box link and, critically, an old secondary email address she'd completely abandoned. This was the vulnerable knot in her digital armor, the tiny mistake all amateurs make. My pulse quickened. She might be a gold digger, but she wasn't a good hacker. I had the key. Now, it was time to unlock the door to her real life. The abandoned secondary email address from Chloe's old blog was a perfect foothold. It was connected to a network of forgotten, low-security accounts, old shopping sites, some outdated professional forums, and, critically, a service she used years ago to manage her online bills before switching to a major bank. This allowed me to map out her earlier financial history without ever needing to .9 anything in the traditional illegal sense. I was simply following the digital thread she'd carelessly left hanging. I spent the next 3 days in my basement, bathed in the cool glow of the ghost. My coffee intake spiked, and the familiar focus of a major investigation returned. My mind was sharp, cutting through the noise like a newly minted algorithm. What I uncovered wasn't just evidence of vanity or overspending. It was a portrait of deliberate financial deception. The first major discovery was the 2 extra bank accounts. These weren't accounts David knew about. They were small, nondescript accounts at minor regional banks, but they held the key to her past employment. I used her old job records, found through the secondary email on a LinkedIn-style profile she'd forgotten to delete, to cross-reference direct deposits. The numbers didn't match. It became clear that for the last few years she had been systematically underreporting her income. The bulk of her paychecks was diverted into these hidden accounts, leaving only a smaller, justifiable portion in the accounts she shared or discussed openly. She was creating a financial illusion for David, pretending to be more financially strained than she was, which, of course, reinforced the need to rely on my money. But the plot thickened with the discovery of her debt. Chloe wasn't good at hiding her liabilities. Through those old billing services, I accessed records that revealed an enormous credit card debt, far beyond her visible income. To cover the minimum payments, she wasn't using her hidden income. She was using something far more dangerous. A pattern of deposits that looked suspiciously like forged or manipulated checks. This wasn't just gold digging anymore. This was entering the territory of bank fraud. I carefully archived everything. Screenshots, transaction logs, dates, and account numbers, all collected with the precision of a state-sponsored audit. I made sure every piece of evidence had an irrefutable legal chain of custody. I realized she hadn't just banned me from her wedding. She had provided me with the opportunity to expose her entire secret life before she could permanently damage my sons. The wedding in the Dominican Republic was approaching, and I was holding her digital birth certificate, and it had a criminal record. My investigation was no longer about a suspicious fiancé. It was about a comprehensive case of financial fraud and potentially criminal tax evasion. The digital trail I had uncovered in Part 3, the 2 hidden bank accounts, and the systematic underreporting of income, led directly to the IRS. When you actively conceal income, you are committing a felony, and Chloe had left a beautifully organized paper trail for me to find. I cross-referenced her documented income with property records I found in public databases, leveraging a technique called asset cross-correlation. While she and David were living in a modest, rented apartment, Chloe had been making substantial, undeclared cash payments toward high-end luxury items, and even sending large, unexplained wire transfers to an offshore account registered to a shell company in a small, non-extradition island nation. This was not the behavior of someone planning a stable family life. This was the work of someone building an escape route. The most damning evidence, however, was in the communications I accessed through the old email recovery features. She hadn't been careful. I found a detailed thread of cynical text messages and emails with a close friend, let's call her Sarah, dating back months. These weren't loving exchanges. They were cold, strategic discussions about my son. In one email, dated just a week before she pushed David to demand the trust fund money, she wrote, "It's almost done. The old man is tight with the purse strings, but once the ring is on, we drain the accounts fast. I figure 6 months tops. Then we can ditch the dead weight and move to the coast. He's so predictable, he'll think the house is the investment, not the payday." That line, "ditch the dead weight," cut deeper than the wedding exclusion. It confirmed the calculated, predatory nature of her relationship with my son. She saw him as a temporary bridge to my money. The trust fund, the house, the life they were supposedly building, it was all a temporary illusion. She was actively plotting not just to take my money, but to abandon David, leaving him financially ruined and emotionally devastated. I printed out the correspondence. The cold, black-and-white printout of her callous words felt heavier than any weapon I had ever handled. This was the final piece of confirmation I needed. My original intent was protection. Now, it was absolutely necessary. I had built a case strong enough to dismantle her entire fraudulent life, and I was going to deliver it just in time for her return from the Dominican Republic. Before I executed the final phase of my plan, I felt a deep, paternal obligation to give David one last chance, one last exit ramp before the inevitable crash. Even armed with incontrovertible evidence of Chloe's massive financial deception and emotional betrayal, I couldn't just unleash chaos without trying to save my son first. I didn't mention the hidden accounts or the offshore wire transfers. I kept it abstract and focused on the basics of trust. They were back from their private ceremony in the Dominican Republic and were staying at a luxury Airbnb, a subtle hint, I knew, that I was expected to fund their new lifestyle immediately. I called David. "Son," I started, trying to keep my voice calm, professional, almost like an old corporate mentor. "I want you to be happy, truly. But before you commit your life and your future to Chloe, you need to ask yourself if you genuinely know her financial reality. Marriage is a partnership, David. Have you seen her credit history? Have you discussed debt? Are you 100% certain there are no lingering obligations she's keeping secret?" I waited, my heart heavy. I was giving him a lifeline, hoping the seeds of doubt would grow. His response was immediate, defensive, and delivered with a tone I hadn't heard before, a mixture of petulance and programmed aggression. He paused, then delivered the final blow that extinguished any lingering hope I had of a peaceful resolution. The line was drawn. The conversation ended with a tense silence, followed by a cold click. He had rejected my veiled warning, essentially signing off on his own future destruction and confirming that the transfer was the only thing that mattered. He wasn't just blind, he was actively enabling her. That call was the point of no return. I closed my laptop. My obligation to be the loving, patient father was over. My duty to be the ruthless protector of my family's legacy and my own financial security had just begun. I was no longer holding the evidence. I was preparing the delivery. David's cold rejection in Part 5 eliminated any ethical ambiguity I might have felt. He had chosen his side, and by doing so, he had activated the nuclear option. My focus now shifted entirely to the flawless execution of Quote 20. This required not just compiling the evidence, but packaging it in a way that guaranteed maximum impact and an immediate, non-negotiable response from the authorities. The venue for the trap was perfect. Chloe and David were throwing a massive Quote 21 party at a lavishly rented mansion, not just for their friends, but for all the high-status people Chloe wanted to impress. It was a clear demand for me to publicly endorse their union and, most importantly, to pay for their future. The irony was sweet. This party, designed to cement their fraudulent lifestyle, would be the very stage for its public, legal implosion. I spent the next 2 days crafting the final Quote 22. It wasn't a file. It was a comprehensive, legally sound dossier. I titled it, Suspicious Financial Activities of Chloe, Last Name, a Preliminary Audit. My expertise as a former NSA consultant was crucial here. I didn't present raw, confusing data. I created a clean, annotated, and easy-to-digest report. It had 4 main sections: hidden income and undisclosed assets, clear records of the 2 regional bank accounts and the systematic divergence of paychecks, credit fraud indicators, the pattern of suspicious deposits linked to covering massive, undisclosed credit card debt, tax evasion, the cross-correlated evidence of undeclared wire transfers to the offshore shell company and undeclared income used for high-end purchases, evidence of intent, key excerpts from her cynical communications with her friend Sarah, explicitly outlining the plan to Quote 24, Quote, and Quote 25, Quote, demonstrating premeditated financial malice. I made sure the report was entirely anonymous, digitally sanitized of any traces leading back to me. The goal was to trigger an official federal investigation, not a messy family confrontation. The IRS, specifically their Criminal Investigation CI division, takes tax fraud, especially combined with evidence of credit manipulation and hidden offshore assets, very seriously. This was a gift they couldn't refuse. The delivery mechanism was the final detail. I would use an encrypted, untraceable public upload service and send the link simultaneously to 2 addresses: the IRS CI tip line and a select, large local media outlet known for investigative reporting. The combination of federal legal pressure and public exposure would ensure that her new life would collapse publicly, catastrophically, and immediately. The day of the party was tomorrow. The stage was set. The mansion was an explosion of white linen, crystal, and manufactured joy. It was exactly the kind of ostentatious display Chloe demanded, all designed to showcase the Quote 26 of her new life with David. I drove my modest 10-year-old sedan to the valet, feeling like a silent, unwelcome relic. I hadn't been invited, but I knew I had to be present to fully appreciate the final act of this theatrical tragedy. I needed to see their faces before, during, and after. I arrived early, slipping in discreetly. Chloe, dressed in a dazzling, imported white gown, likely financed by the money she should have reported to the IRS, was the center of attention. She had an air of smug triumph, moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations on her exclusive Dominican wedding. David, looking slightly overwhelmed, but clearly happy to be basking in her reflected glory, stayed close to her side. When Chloe finally spotted me, standing by the edge of the terrace, her smile instantly froze, replaced by a thin, razor-sharp expression of controlled fury. She walked over, her face a mask of false hospitality. "Robert," she hissed, low enough for only me to hear. "I thought we made it clear this was a private event. David said you understood." I sipped my drink, just sparkling water, and gave her a small, almost affectionate smile. I did understand, Chloe, but I felt compelled to come. After all, a wedding is a family celebration, and I couldn't miss giving my son his marriage gift. She laughed, a brittle, strained sound. "A gift? We haven't seen a large transfer yet, Robert. No house, no check. You're late. If you came to cause trouble, I'll have security remove you." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, completely relaxed. "Oh, the gift is coming, Chloe. It's a comprehensive audit. It covers all your undisclosed assets, the offshore transfers, and the evidence of your unreported income. It's highly detailed, meticulously sourced, and fully compliant with federal standards. Think of it as a final, high-value deposit, not into your bank, but into your legal record." Her composure visibly cracked. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, sickly sheen. Her eyes darted around, searching the crowd, trying to ascertain if I was bluffing. What are you talking about? Are you threatening me, old man?" "No threat," I replied, standing up straight. "It's an announcement. Tonight, Chloe, you are getting exactly what you deserve, and it's going to be delivered with the full weight of the U.S. government behind it. Enjoy the next hour. It's the last time you'll celebrate anything for a very, very long time." I walked away and found a secluded spot near the back entrance. It was 8 p.m. The cocktail hour was ending, and the speeches were about to begin. My delivery time was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., right at the peak of their anticipated public triumph. The tension was suffocating. I felt the cold, hard drive in my pocket, ready to unleash the storm. After my chilling exchange with Chloe, I settled into my hidden corner. The atmosphere of the party became almost suffocatingly tense. For me, because I knew what was coming, and for Chloe, who was clearly unnerved by my cryptic warning. Her initial fury had morphed into a nervous anxiety that she tried poorly to mask with excessive laughter and over-the-top displays of affection for David. I watched her meticulously. She kept checking her phone, presumably looking for any strange notifications, unaware that the real damage was about to arrive from a source she couldn't monitor. She was focused on the local threat, me, but the actual threat was global, digital, and bureaucratic. This was the difference between an amateur threat and a professional operation. David, oblivious, was giving his part of the toast, talking about their, quote, 36, and thanking all the guests for celebrating their, quote, 37. It was painful to watch him build a foundation on such shaky, corrupted ground. Every word he spoke about their happiness was another nail in Chloe's coffin, as I knew how quickly that happiness was about to dissolve under the weight of federal scrutiny. My own task was simple: the final triple check of the payload. I pulled out my secure phone, connected to a highly encrypted private VPN tunnel, the kind of setup I used to brief government officials, and reviewed the last stages of the automated script. The script was timed to execute the anonymous upload and distribution to the IRS and the news outlet precisely at 8:30 p.m., right when Chloe was scheduled to give her triumphant gold digger toast. I had built in multiple redundancies. If the first upload failed, the script would automatically switch to 3 different hosting services and use 3 different anonymized email chains for delivery. The report had to arrive simultaneously at both destinations, creating maximum leverage. The media would report the story as soon as the IRS confirmed receipt, and the IRS would be forced to act immediately due to the public pressure. I looked at the clock. 8:25 p.m. 5 minutes to detonation. I saw Chloe step up to the microphone, her face flushed from wine and nervous energy, ready to bask in her moment. This was the climax of her long con, the pinnacle of her financial manipulation. I took a deep breath. I felt no rage, only the cold, clear satisfaction of a job done perfectly. I clicked the single, final command button on my phone. The script executed. Data flowed instantly through the encrypted tunnel. My wedding gift was on its way. It was 8:30 p.m. The automated script had executed perfectly. The comprehensive audit, Chloe's financial history, offshore transfers, and tax fraud evidence was now sitting in the inboxes of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the most influential investigative news desk in the city. Chloe, unaware that her digital doom had been delivered, was at the height of her glory. She stood at the microphone, clutching David's hand, giving a saccharine, self-congratulatory speech. "To our new life," she purred, raising a champagne flute. "A life of luxury and endless opportunity. A life that Robert, thank goodness, is finally going to fund properly." At that exact moment, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to confusion. First, Chloe's expensive smartphone, sitting on the small table next to her, began vibrating furiously. Her confident smile faltered as the screen lit up repeatedly with notifications. She tried to ignore it, continuing her toast, but the persistent buzzing drew the eyes of the 100 guests. Then, a louder, more public disruption occurred. The large flat-screen television mounted behind the bar, which had been softly displaying generic mood music visuals, suddenly flashed to a black screen with urgent, bright red text. "Breaking news alert." A local news anchor's serious face appeared. The audio, which was piped through the mansion's sound system, cut through the music. "We have received an unprecedented and highly detailed financial dossier this evening," the anchor reported, his voice grave. "It involves serious allegations of bank fraud, undisclosed offshore assets, and federal tax evasion related to a woman recently married in the Dominican Republic. We can confirm that the Internal Revenue Service has acknowledged receipt of the same information and is launching an immediate, full-scale criminal investigation." The anchor then paused dramatically, saying, "While we cannot name the subject yet, sources indicate the investigation focuses on a massive fraud operation linked to an impending large inheritance." The room went dead silent. Everyone, David, the friends, the staff, was staring at the screen, then back at a paralyzed Chloe. Her face, which had been pale minutes before, was now ghostly white. The champagne flute dropped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor like a starting pistol. David was the first to speak, his voice shaking. "Chloe? What are they talking about? What inheritance? What offshore accounts?" Before Chloe could even stammer a denial, the final, undeniable element of the climax arrived. Two black, unmarked sedans pulled up fast to the front of the mansion. 3 men in crisp, dark suits, carrying official-looking briefcases and badges, walked briskly through the front door. They weren't security. They were federal agents. One of the agents spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Chloe didn't say a word. She looked directly across the room, past David, past the stunned guests, and her eyes locked onto mine. In that split second, the look was pure, undiluted hatred and utter defeat. She knew, absolutely and without a doubt, that her wedding gift had been delivered. I didn't wait around for the messy details. My mission was accomplished. I had protected my future and, in the most painful way possible, forced my son to face reality. As the federal agents surrounded Chloe and the chaos erupted among the guests, who were now looking less like socialites and more like witnesses, I quietly slipped out the back door and drove home. The fallout was exactly what I predicted. The news story went viral within hours. Chloe was immediately taken into custody. The detailed evidence was so overwhelming and legally packaged that she couldn't bluster her way out of it. Her dream life dissolved instantly. The fraudulent wedding was essentially null and void, given the legal circumstances and the underlying deceit. For David, the consequences were devastating. He was initially furious with me, accusing me of sabotaging his happiness and ruining his life. But as the full, undeniable evidence, the offshore transfers, the cynical emails, the bank fraud, came out during the initial court proceedings, his rage finally broke and gave way to absolute, crushing realization. He saw how deeply he had been manipulated, not just by her financial demands, but by her complete lack of genuine emotion. It took time, but the relationship with David began to heal. He didn't thank me, not explicitly, but he started listening. He began to understand that my actions, though harsh, were the only way to save him from permanent ruin and possibly legal liability himself. He went back to his old job, started cleaning up his own finances, and slowly, quietly, began rebuilding his sense of self-worth. As for me, I found peace. I finally sold the old house and bought a smaller place near the coast. I dedicated my retirement to something genuinely fulfilling, using my white hat skills to volunteer for nonprofits, helping them secure their digital infrastructure against hackers. I was finally using my expertise for pure good, completely divorced from corporate greed or government bureaucracy. I was Robert again, but a happier, wiser version. My life isn't just about security and code anymore. It's about freedom, purpose, and genuine peace. I learned that sometimes the most effective act of love is the harshest lesson. I have often wondered if there was a gentler path, an easier way. But looking back at the calculated cruelty of Chloe's plan, I know there wasn't. So tell me, was I right to use my specific skills to dismantle her life so publicly and decisively? If you were in my shoes, with that evidence and that history, what would you have done? Don't forget to like this story if you felt the tension and the sweet relief of digital justice. Subscribe right now so you don't miss any of my true revenge stories. And drop a comment below with your thoughts on my ultimate wedding gift. The end. Thank you for listening.